and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. As always, on the fourth Wednesday of the month, I'm joined by Mark LaBarr, conservation biologist for Audubon, Vermont. And today, we will once again be heading to the Bahamas. Nice to see you.
Always great to be here.
Now, you have had the opportunity to visit the Bahamas this winter. Nice.
I did, and this was my third winter that I've been able to go down there as part of Audubon's international program. So. Always a nice thing to do.
So you were working.
Well, you know that everybody says that. I was indeed working. You know, and it's funny because you say you're going to the Bahamas, but we did have a reason for going down. This year was the International Piping Plover Census. So every 5 years there's a census done, a hemispheric census done for piping plovers, and the U.S., the Canadian Fish and Wildlife Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Audubon, and a number of different other NGOs got together to go down and survey piping plovers down in the Bahamas, and this is one of the little guys that we were looking for. Now, piping plovers, they're endangered in the United States, and they're small. So as much as it seems like it would be easy work and fun work, it's actually often very challenging.
And so I know you have a map of the area that you were working in.
Yeah, so the Bahamas host a large amount of wintering piping plovers. They go there during the winter months before they come back in the spring to breed. They are back on a number of beaches along the U.S. So the surveys this year brought in about 1,400 birds, which is, there's only 8,000 birds. That's the global population estimate. So, just a little bit under 20% of the birds in the world use the Bahamas. We were in South Andros Island, as I've been in the past couple of years. These were some of our land survey routes, so you can see those strips of yellow there. And these were our walking routes, where we literally had to go out and walk the beaches of the Bahamas looking for birds.
That's a lot of area to look for birds.
It was about 20 miles. And so It was one of those things that we would leapfrog or piggyback. I was working with Tammy Pearl, who I was down there last year, and so so we kind of had it down. We knew where we needed to go and what we needed to do.
So tell me a little bit about what you saw.
Well, fortunately this year Tammy was back, and she works for the National Park Service in Assateague Island, and she's got the eyes. So she probably saw most of the plovers. But we were joined by two Bahamian students from the College of the Bahamas, Anise Monroe and Anishka Morris, that came with us and helped us. So we would often break down into groups of two as we did these surveys, and we walked up and down the beaches. The beaches themselves, this is what we were looking at. And again, you're looking for these sparrow-sized, teeny little birds.
They're the same color as the sand.
As the sand. They're right up in on the sand or in the rack, which is that the stuff that you can see there that's pushed up. And so, you'd have miles of this to cover in a particular day. And, it's not bad walking beaches, but still you had to be, attentive. There were a couple places where we knew we had birds, and we had seen birds in the past. And they were a little bit different than the beaches. They were these flats that would open up at low tide.
Okay.
And so we had to time that so that we would get to these areas, whether it be early in the morning, midday, or sometimes we were fortunate enough to have to survey them right at dusk. And so you would get these pretty nice sunsets that would happen over the side. And you can see the flats open up here. We were, the birds, the plovers and other shorebirds would come out once the flats opened, and they would begin feeding, and we just had to be there in order to, to try to catch them.
So how many birds did you see? And when you say catch them, does that mean just identify them, or did you band them?
No, we weren't. So by catching them, we were just looking for them. We would just try to find, counting them. And we had a record of 129 piping plovers that we found out there. We would use our scopes and and binoculars in order to identify the birds. So that was a good number. The previous time was, in the 80s. And you can see it's it's really easy to see these plovers, right?
No.
Can you see those? There are actually a couple piping plovers in this picture, and in the background, there's a number of sanderlings. And some of the big differences are just the color of their legs, where plovers are a little bit lighter, orange legs, and the sanderlings are black-legged. They have other differences as well, but you know, a lot of our time was spent staring through binoculars and scopes, looking for those birds as they moved around. As far as our land surveys, we had about 52 birds that we saw that were along that type thing. And then we were fortunate enough to head out to pretty much the Netherlands of, you know, or not Netherlands, but the way out port of South Andros Island, which are these keys, roughly 118 square miles of small islands that we were looking for these birds. And we would have to go from these small little island to island, you know, checking all of the beaches. We cruised around in a boat with, which was captained by Bernd Ferguson, who was our boat captain, and we would, it took us about an hour to get out to the southern keys there, and then, like I said, we surveyed on 3 different days. We surveyed different sections of the keys, and you know, just would drive up and down the islands or stop and walk on the islands, which was really good because they are very remote. And we found quite a few birds there this year. We actually found 77, more than we had in our land surveys out in the Keys.
Were they easier to see?
No, they weren't. They weren't. You know, I mean, it's funny because, and here's Tammy, and you can see on down at the far end of this shot is Bernd, who's our boat captain, and he's basically pushing some of the birds towards us so that we can get a better look at the birds. And again, it's just really difficult. There's this particular beach that we were at where we saw these plovers. Tammy was looking at a group of plovers that were further down the beach. And at one point I turned around and I set up my scope and I'm looking the other direction. And Bernd, I said, you know, we didn't find any plovers here. I didn't see anything. And Bernd goes, what about these guys? And because I was using the scope, I was looking far down the beach, and about 20 feet in front of me were a whole bunch of little piping plovers. So, you know, again, it was one of those things that, and Tammy has had the eye for it. You know, I don't see plovers on a regular basis, so it takes me a little bit, but she would. We had one time when we were out on in the Keys and we're boating along one of these shores on one of these small islands, and she found a single bird sitting out on the beach, which was kind of, you know, all of a sudden it's like, plover, and you're like, really, Tammy? And she was like, yep, and sure enough, there was one there. So she was really good.
So were you kind of tired of beaches after looking for plovers?
It's funny because it is, you know, again, we were down there for 8 days.
Yeah, it's a long time.
And we were working every day. And yes, you're walking on beaches and you're looking for plovers and you're driving around trying to find these flats that might host the plovers, and you're going on very nice boat rides. But, you know, you're working 8 days straight. And so, yeah, after a while, you know, squint your eyes a little bit and, you know, you get a little tired of bringing those binoculars up in the scope, but still, it was winter in Vermont, so not that bad of a trade. So
now you weren't banding, but did you see any birds that were banded?
Yes, and so that's really kind of the interesting thing, because piping plovers have been, yeah, see, they're cute little birds, and you can see this one has a flag on it, what they call a flag, and this flag is green K27. So when we're out there and we're looking for these birds, we're constantly not only looking to count them, but we're looking to find these banded individuals. Because the piping plover is listed as endangered, there's been a lot of work on them. So they've been banded regularly along the Atlantic coast and in other parts of you know, the United States where they're found. And last year they were banded in the Bahamas. So this green flag K27 actually was a bird that was banded in North Carolina.
Wow. Now I'm surprised the band is so high. Usually you think of bands in little rings.
Yes.
Down toward the end of them.
And I do banding at the Audubon, and we often put the bands lower down on that, just the standard U.S. Fish and Wildlife band. This is put up there a little bit higher. The birds, the way that they have decided that this is the best way to do it.
You can see it easier.
Yeah,
certainly.
you can see it, and if it was down low, it would potentially be in the water or in the muck as they were feeding. And from a bird perspective, I guess they've determined that that's the safest place for them. But we found 7 birds that were banded, which was pretty cool. 6 of those we were able to identify we were actually able to see the band. And then the one we only got a quick glimpse of the band. But we had 3 birds from Canada, 2 from New Jersey, and 2 from North Carolina. And the interesting thing is one of the Canadian birds we saw last year when we were out there. So, and we saw it basically on one beach over from where we had seen it. So we know that that bird at least has come back and is looking at that same area to winter.
So the numbers that you saw, what does that tell you about the population? Is it good news?
Yeah, I mean, basically, a lot of the Bahamas were unknown up until the last census, which occurred in 2011, when all of a sudden they really, Audubon in particular, realized that there was a larger population than we thought down there. And so a place called the Jolter Keys, which is further north in the Bahamas, has just recently become a national park, and the Bahamian National Trust helped with that, and so it's protected primarily because so many piping plovers have been found using that as a wintering location.
Wow, so you must have been seeing other birds as well, being out there for 8 days?
Yeah, we were, and we were out there and we were looking at a bunch of different shorebirds. We would see, you would often see them on these flats as you pulled up. As I mentioned, that one picture earlier, that it was kind of fun to try to find the plovers. We had sanderlings that were there. One of the other focal species that we were looking for was a bird called the Wilson's plover. And that's a small little guy, a little bit of a thicker bill than your piping plover, looks a little bit different. And so we were counting those as well in particular. But we would see a number of birds like short-billed dowitchers, which would be out on the flats as well, feeding once those flats are along the beach. And other birds, the ruddy turnstone was one that was a pretty regular that we saw all around when we did all of our surveys, both the land surveys and the surveys out in the Keys. So, there were other things, Bahamian osprey that we would see, oyster catchers, which is another bird that was out there. So, plus a lot of our small songbirds that wintered down in the Bahamas as well, and then come back up. So it was a great trip all around from a bird perspective.
Well, it's also an important territory for other species as well.
Right, and so, always, when we look at plovers and we look at this wintering habitat, the bonefish comes up. Now, the bonefish is a prized fish for anglers, and people come from all over the world to go down and try to catch this fish, most of the time using fly rod equipment, and they spend lots of money in and around South Andros and some of the other areas, and because of that, it's an economic driving force within South Andros. There's a lot of bonefish clubs, and a lot of the boat captains work for these bonefish clubs. And
is it just like a sport fish?
It's a sport fish.
Fun to catch?
Yeah, it's fun to catch, and I'm not a fisher person. I'm not an angler, but the folks that you run into when you're down there, will spend their entire day out on these boats looking for these bonefish, and the captains know where they are, and they share the same habitat that the plovers do. So by protecting and creating this national park for the plovers, you're also protecting this this habitat that the fish use, which is, again, very important to the economics of at least South Andros Island.
And turtles as well.
What's that?
Turtles as well.
Turtles. We saw lots of turtles. The occasional shark would float by. Out on some of the islands, there's a species of iguana, which is, down in the Southern Keys, which is unique to the Southern Keys. So we would often see those, or, you could see their tracks as you would land up on the islands and stuff like that. So quite a bit of wildlife for sure down there, which we don't see here in Vermont. So a nice thing to do in the wintertime.
Well, I can't let you go without asking you one bird question.
Okay.
There's been a red-tailed hawk hanging around our backyard
Okay.
in the field.
Yeah.
Is that going to prevent the bluebirds from nesting? I saw them earlier checking out the boxes, but I haven't seen them since.
Probably not. Red tails are not known to be something that preys on birds. They're looking more for the mammals that you might find out in the fields. You know, a sharp-shinned or a Cooper's hawk might be a different story if you were to see one of those. But at the same time, they are a raptor, and many birds, you know, associate that shape and size as to be a negative thing. So hopefully your bluebirds will decide that they're not threatened and come back to your boxes.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Mark. Well, if you have a bird-related question, you can pass it along to Mark. You can write to him at Audubon, Vermont, 255 Sherman Hollow Road in Huntington. That zip code is 05462. You can also email your questions to Mark. His email address is mlabarr@audubon.org. Send Mark your questions, and he'll try to find answers for you in an upcoming edition of Bird Notes. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.